Hi guys. Double T was bestowing a little bit of magic on you and me. You like your hat, don't you? I have to say, I do love your sombrero. It is pretty fabulous. All right. Well, you sit down. It's a happy Friday Eve. Oh my goodness. This week. Oh, we're finally getting a little bit of non-rainy weather here in Baltimore, but I think it's not to last long. I think the rains will be back next week, maybe this weekend. So here we are. So today I thought that we could look at some of the quilts that are at the Baltimore Museum of Art and the Baltimore Center for History and Culture, which is the fancy name for the Baltimore Historical Society. They have a lovely museum. Because I keep running into situations. Hey, Robin, thank you so much. I keep running into situations where I see a quilt or I'm talking to somebody about a quilt and they're like, oh yeah, so-and-so donated that to the Baltimore Museum of Art, or that's at the Baltimore Museum of Art, or I'm looking for something and it shows up at the Baltimore Museum of Art. So I'm like, let's look at what they've got. So I thought that's what we could do today. And then of course, got to catch up on Carrie Hall. We're in the home stretch there. But one thing, exciting thing that I wanted to mention. So on Monday, which was Memorial Day, I wimped out on actually having like a research subject, and I went through a box of stuff that I've had sitting around that I had forgotten about, didn't realize was shoved in the corner under a stack of other stuff. And at the very end, I had these 2 sandwich bags of these like scraps. And at first glance, because, I've bought these kind of things at like the Salvation Army Women's Auxiliary rummage sale, and this kind of stuff, it's just, you kind of cherry pick it for good fabric, and some of it's awful. And I'm thinking that it's, somebody has cut up these squares to make like a charm quilt or something. And so I think I said something to the effect of like, oh, these are, somebody was trying to make something real ugly here. And then I end the stream. And I'm sitting here at my desk for a few minutes, and I'm looking at these fabric scraps, and I realize they're not actually fabric scraps. They are fabric samples. And I like did one of these when I started looking at them, because I was like, these are from either a manufacturer, a distributor. I'll be honest, it almost looks like somebody went to a fabric store and cut perfectly neat little swatches of all of the fabrics that they had in the fabric store. I don't think that's the case, because as I've gone through these, I can see where there's like some chopped off little like end cuts. So it seems to me like these had to have been from some type of, manufacturing or distribution source. And, where they might lay out a pile of fabric and then just cut it all into these swatches. And so I don't know if this is a case of like, order a swatch, or somebody got a set of swatches for some purpose, like maybe, I don't know, fashion design. Like, I don't know. I don't know what to say about these. I'm assuming they're all from one manufacturer, because I'm 100% positive, with the exception of one swatch, that they are all synthetic. And some of the fabrics are really almost modern looking, but I'm fairly certain they are from the 70s, because there is a ton of like clearly double knits, things you would not find today. And then there's a whole bunch of other stuff that were like sheer fabrics. Like here's a little stack of, these really pretty sheer fabrics. Some of these like wild, like these are these sort of wild polyester knits. They're not double knits. They've got some body. They're probably would have been for like tops or dresses. You could still find stuff like this kind of, in stores, clothing wise, these types of fabrics. But again, I'm 99% sure that these are from the 70s. This is not from any time recently. And so as I'm looking through this stuff, and I have no idea where it's from, but I'm like, there are categories in here. And, we recently, a while back, it was book before last, on Quilt Nerding, on our Book Talk Tuesday, we read The Dress Diary, which was about a woman who created this fabric swatch book in the 1840s through, I think it was like the 1870s, 1880s. And, she sometimes, writes a little thing about what the fabrics are, but, a lot of it's were just left to kind of wonder. And, the author came up with some stories about some of the stuff that was in there, but I love this idea of documenting. And I actually have a growing collection of quilting cottons or calico prints from the 70s and 80s. And I've been, slowly trying to set scraps aside, little swatches aside, and, label them with what's Cranston VIP Printworks, what's Peter Pan, what's, all of these different, Ellie Walker, and all of these different mills, that were pumping out a lot of stuff back then. And in some cases they're 100-year prints. In some cases they're reproductions of 19th century fabrics. All this stuff got kicked off in the 70s. But again, these are fashion fabrics. There's a few things in here that I would think might be like maybe quilt worthy, but again, they're synthetic. So I just wanted to document them. And so I Hey, Marianne. Yes, Cranston VIP. I am an absolute sucker for. My mom had tons of it in my childhood. She made patchwork stuff. She made me clothing. I have. I actually bought a quilt, and I'm sure I've talked about it a couple times. I bought a quilt a few years back. I probably had it for 4 or 5 years now. But it had a print that my mother had made me a dress out of when I was about 3. And it was two different colorways of the print. One was red and yellow, one was yellow and red. They're little chicks. You may be familiar with this fabric. In any event, I had to buy that quilt because it was made out of that. Just so sentimental to me. So yes, I absolutely love Cranston VIP. I even have come around to like the browns. There were those browns and rusts that were like a really big deal for a while. My mom had tons of them. I really, really disliked them, but I've come around to them. So yes, I collect. I collect those. But back to these fabrics, like some of them are almost like, well, I'll show you this. It's a synthetic. It's got this like knit backing, but it's like a burlap. It's like a polyester burlap. So some of it like seems like upholstery. So again, like big question mark. I have no idea. But anyway, I've been mounting them to acid-free scrapbook paper as I've sorted them. I started doing this on Tuesday. Got a big old scrapbook, and I think I got enough pages for this collection of fabric, maybe. And then to add to it sections of fabrics I can identify. So like my Cranston VIPs, I have some rayon and wool samples, and I know the companies those come from. So I thought that would be kind of a archival way to mount this stuff and just have it as like a little collection. But I started with the wool. So these are not actually wool, but they are synthetic wool. And some of them are really pretty. Some of them I'm like, oh, wow, I would totally go for like a skirt or a jacket or a pair of pants out of these. And these are like all these crazy, so let's see, these are kind of, these are textured polyester double knit. These are these weird sweater knits. Look at these. I realize they might be a little bit hard to see because of the shiny scrapbook pages, but I will take a picture when I'm done and maybe make a little reel of it. And, crowdsourcing information sometimes works out pretty well. So if anybody recognizes a particular fabric in these, like once I get a chance to photograph them, I would love to know. I mean, like I said, because of this mix of different fabric types, it really, really looks, thanks, Robin. It really looks like somebody just, like, these are all the fabric samples you could get from a particular fabric store. I'll be honest, that's what it looks like to me. And it seemed to me, because they were housed in these plastic bags and they're duplicates, like these are the duplicates I found so far. It seems like it was one of those things like, I just wonder if like a fabric store employee maybe wanted their own swatch book or something, and they went and like got one of each. I don't know. I think about my mom working in fabric stores, and I honestly don't remember. I know the one place she worked was like a home dec store, and they didn't do swatches, but they would give you, like, you could, put down a deposit and take like the Waverly, blah, 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 chintz swatch book, and these are big pieces of fabric. You guys know what they look like, what I'm talking about. You could take that home with you and like, do all your decor stuff, and then you bring it back, you get your deposit back. So that was kind of what I was used to, with my mom working in fabric stores. But I do know other fabric stores, like especially independents, and also mail order fabric stores, they'll cut you a little, 2x2, 3x3 inch swatch. Fabric.com, back when they were still in operation, I love the fact that you could request swatches for like $1, and they would send you pretty decent sized swatches of, like pricey fabrics. I have to admit, I requested some swatches and was just like, what they sent me was actually probably enough for my project. I can't remember what I was working on, but I wanted some faux fur. And so I'd requested some red faux fur, and they sent me like two or three, out of what I'd chosen. It wasn't like random, but pieces that were like 4 inches by 5 inches. I mean, they were pretty beefy. And in hindsight, I was like, well, this was kind of a good deal because I got this piece for $1, and it really met my needs. I don't need to order like a half yard or a whole yard of it. So anyway, the history of fabric swatches. So anyway, I don't know if like maybe some of those fabric stores, and if anybody had worked at a fabric store back in the day, the pre-Joanne fabric stores, Hancock's. Gosh, I'm trying to think of the other ones that I know. Oh shoot, there's one. So Sofro was one that was in my hometown growing up. My mom shopped there often. She also worked in an independent fabric store that they serviced sewing machines. So they didn't sell sewing machines, but they had a guy that serviced. He was a singer authorized mechanic or something. So anyway, all of this stuff just runs through my head, and because I was a child and I don't remember. I would really love to know some of the history of these fabric stores, especially since they're all gone. I don't love Joanne, and I don't love Joanne, but I'm gonna miss it. I mean, like they did have fabrics that were, costume and Halloween stuff was great. Their formal stuff, I mean, you're not gonna go in there and buy yards of silk. It was all synthetic, but if you needed to make a prom dress, they had like gorgeous stuff. Anyway, are there any chain fabric stores left? There are none, I don't think. So Marianne, my gram worked for Kresge's way long ago. I don't recall her bringing home swatches. Yeah, like I don't know. I think about like the garment district and in New York and Los Angeles, and maybe at one time manufacturers like salesmen would go to these stores and say like, look what we have. I don't know, but the fact they were in sandwich bags and they were very neatly stacked and packed in these sandwich bags, like I have totally like made a mess of them just looking through them. So anyway, just a little project. It's fun. If anybody has any ideas or thoughts or leads or anything, let me know. As much as I would love to own one of those swatch books with the antique fabrics of the 19th century, I don't know that I'll ever get there. Maybe one day I'll run across something, but I feel like I have to make my own. And in 100 years, somebody's gonna go, "This was a smart lady for making all of these polyester sample books." And all of this ubiquitous Cranston VIP that nobody needs identified because there's so much of it. Anyway, all right, let us look at some quilts. Like I said, I feel like anytime I'm looking at a Baltimore album quilt, they're all here in Maryland at these two museums. So I scrolled down the page here. This is, the BMA. So let's go to the first. They adopted this new layout on their museum page a while back, and I don't like it. This is terrible to say, but I think it's kind of bad design. It looks like, I don't know, it looks like somebody's like, I don't know, sophomore year website project. And I mean, for an art museum, I'm just like, I don't love this. It is a very clean spare design. But anyway, they have where you can search the collection. And I love the museums that do this. I know not all museums do this. Unfortunately, although they have a lot listed, they actually have a lot of image not available. So that's a pain. They also have some that I quickly looked to see if there was some very good information on them, and there was not. So, and what I specifically wanted to mention were these, this monument quilt, Force Upsetting Rape Culture. I was like, whoa, these are very like, bright red, very noticeable. So I thought we'd look at those first real quick. I did pull up some of the information about this. Unfortunately, the museum doesn't have a whole lot of information, but they did have, the basic info so that I could look this up. So it looks like they acquired these in 2021, but these were part of something that I was not aware of. And I always, when I hear about these things, I'm always like, oh, how did I miss this? This was another one of those projects. And I say another one, like I mean it in a bad way, and I don't. But this is one of those projects where an organization created quilts, quilt blocks, or quilts to put on the National Mall. And so this was one. This was kind of about like, I mean, I think it says everything it needs to say in the title, upsetting rape culture. This is about, women's rights. And I mean, see this, it says, let's see, I trusted you. I reclaim my body as my sanctuary. And it looks like there's a lot of like writing in here, maybe journaling. I'm not sure. So this stuff is pretty powerful. And I do know recently there was a trans rights similar event that took place at the mall. I want to say it was not this past weekend before. Again, I didn't know about it until after the fact. Somebody sent it to me and I was like, I would have gone to this just to see, to join into the causes that I do care about, but also just to see these quilts and provide the support for a community that is utilizing this method of, speaking out. Obviously, they're taking a note from the Names Project, which was the AIDS quilt. And oh gosh, the statistics on the AIDS quilt, it has grown and grown and grown over the decades. If you're not familiar, what kind of rock have you been living under? But I mean, no disrespect. The Names Project, was really started, and I'm blanking on the guy who started it, and they're kind of a collective grew up around it. But the intent was to create. They ended up being panels, and they were all attached, spread out across the mall. But they were to honor people that had died of AIDS. And it's a really powerful thing. I've at QuiltCon in Pasadena, I think it was probably 2016, I think, they had I think it was 2 or 3 panels from the AIDS quilt, and they're huge. Each panel is the size of like a bed quilt, but each panel is dedicated to one person. So it's big. And they kind of attach it all together with cable ties, those plastic cable tie things, and taking it down. It's heavy, because the people that made these are not necessarily quilters. So anyway, that is what these types of projects are taking that as a nod to that project and doing something similar. And it really is. So I looked this up. Unfortunately, sometimes when you look at these URLs, it's upsetting rape culture, but I see grape. I mean, for a serious thing, I'm like, oh, that's unfortunate. Let me put this link in here in case you want to look at it. So this is what this is about. Founded by in 2010 by and for survivors. Force is an art and artist collective dedicated to end sexual violence and build a culture of consent, widely known for creating public art to disrupt rape culture. Force is an intersectional, LGBTQ-focused, multicultural, pro-Black, and anti-white supremacist collective. So, they've been around for a while. It says the 50th and final display of the monument quilt. So it looks like this has been displayed multiple times. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this, but yeah, I thought this was interesting that they did this. Not sure what this says. No something. But it says you are not alone. And I think that's really powerful. And you look, and I think they're calling each of these pieces blocks. But they look, I mean, you can see this little tent here, this tent, and you can see people. um, will give you some idea of the size. I mean, each of these blocks, I think, is actually a quilt-sized piece. So, anyway, this is interesting. So, now let's look at some of the historical stuff they have. Make sure, yeah. A lot of these things, unfortunately, I'm going, oh, that sounds so interesting, but I can't see it. And I have to cut them a break because this takes a lot of effort to get this stuff online, and photographing stuff, and just based on their bandwidth and funding and all that stuff, it can take a while. So some of these quilts I know were documented by Dr. Dunton. I have not had a chance to take his book out or to catalog all of the quilts he had listed. I mean, I want to do it. It's just, again, a lengthy project. So let's look at these. This is the John Wesley Baltimore album quilt. Gift of Ashbury Methodist Village, Gaithersburg, Maryland, which is in southern Maryland, close to DC. This, I am not very knowledgeable about the different categories of Baltimore album quilts, but there are multiple categories. I believe Jennifer Goldsboro, she was one of the I guess I would say, like, important researchers of Baltimore album quilts, and she identified sort of these different classes of Baltimore album quilts. I think that this is in the high style. And the high style are the ones that are, if you zoom in, I don't know if it was this, will let me zoom in. No, I think this is as close as I can get. But, when you get up close and look at these, there is a lot. I mean, this wreath alone is just encrusted. It's, if you look at all of the individual pieces that have to be appliqued to create these little blocks, there's a lot of work in there. And so, they're very finely wrought. The stitching is very, very good. And to some degree, they're also in better shape. And because I think that they were sort of more prized because of all the work that went into them. And they were made likely by master quilters. There's a lot of speculation. And I think to some degree, some of it has been documented, but I think it's still a little bit speculative, that there were individuals, Mary Simon is one name, and Axa Goodwin is another one, but she may not have been as involved with Baltimore album quilts as I'm thinking. But essentially, there was quite possibly like a sort of a professional cottage industry for these, where, you could order blocks to be done. You could get a kit where all the stuff was already cut out kind of and sort of arranged for you, and all you had to do was stitch it down. Not to say that that's easy, but like you could get half the work done. Or you could request a block, a particularly intense block, and so on. So there was this, this cottage industry possibly. And there's a very narrow window for these in Baltimore. Certainly album quilts are not a Baltimore specific thing. There's lots of album quilts out there. There's, the heyday of album quilts, I guess, is, the 19th century. I kind of feel like they never go out of style. We're looking at stuff, in the 1880s. So the Baltimore album quilts are like 1845 to 1850 something. It's really narrow window. Which I think also gives credence to the fact that there may have been this cottage industry going on. And when the cottage industry kind of, ends, dies out, the women in charge don't want to do it anymore, or possibly even we're running up against economic concerns, etc. All of a sudden then these high style quilts are not being made anymore. So I think that there's considerations for, the story of these quilts. But anyway, album quilts are they're kind of ubiquitous. You get people often don't want to make the same thing over and over. So they will make a block each block is different. Newer quilters are encouraged, or were encouraged. I don't know if it happens so much anymore, but we're encouraged to practice their piecing and learn applique skills by doing, different blocks that have, require different skills. And then, of course, we look at all of the friendship quilts and the signature quilts. Sometimes those are different blocks like this. So there's lots of reasons why people make album quilts, and they're still quite popular. So, but the point I'm making is when you look at Baltimore album quilts, there's really specific things going on. They are not just a pretty flowery album quilt. There's really specific things. And like I said, I am by no means a scholar. I have been to a number of lectures. I've looked at lots of them, but it really takes this like commitment, I think, just kind of like fabric dating. It takes this commitment to looking at stuff over and over and over again and committing different aspects of it to memory. And I'm just not so good at that. But some of the things I do know you can look for are these baskets. When they're very finely wrought, you've got like, there's so many little skinny pieces in there, maybe or maybe not bias bound or bias cut strips. I think a lot of times these are not, but they're in these different configurations to make these like almost like wire looking baskets. Some of them are sort of woven. And again, these like really dense configurations of flowers, either in wreaths or in the baskets, or in the cornucopia. The cornucopias are very popular. I feel like, is it really a Baltimore album quilt if it doesn't have a cornucopia? And then, you'll see things like monuments, or this one is in particular home. And I'm guessing maybe John Wesley, maybe this is his home. I'm not sure. I don't know who he is. Maybe this is John Wesley. I don't know. But like I said, I think this is one of the high styles. And then the high style quilts are also, I think, broken into different groupings depending on what they look like. So that's my uneducated lecture on Baltimore album quilts. So they've got some crazy quilts here. Let's see, this one. Okay, so we've got a couple names, and I feel like I've seen a couple of these. So this is Augusta Adele Smith. This is very pretty, obviously very good condition. Look at these fans in the corners. And we read Penny McMorris's Crazy Quilts book. We learned about some of the ubiquitous and standard things with these quilts, and fans are one aspect. Let's see. Sorry, my for some reason my chat is not coming over to my other side here. Just making sure I'm not missing stuff. Okay, come on. There we go. Okay. Let's see. This one, Minnie Minderline. Okay. Oh, and she made it, and it was a gift of Minnie Minderline. Who knows? Let's see. Oil paint. There's oil paint in this. Plastic? So the date is 1885. I'm curious to know what the plastic is. Cellulose nitrate. So it would have been an early plastic. So like celluloid, maybe. I don't know when that was invented. So yeah, this looks like a very, very fine example. Lots of these, what I'm guessing is either embroidered or painted floral motifs on these big scraps. Probably velvet. Oh, look at this one. This is interesting. Looks like a peacock in the middle. This one's from West Virginia. Yeah, peacock. I feel like maybe I've seen this one in person, maybe, or a similar one. So this is interesting. This has got these embroidered pieces all the way around. Obviously we can't look at this in like super granular detail, but I do know sometimes these quilts, women were able to pick up pre-embroidered pieces. So I'm not saying that's what this is, but it could be. There were lots of, factory application of these pre-embroidered things. I believe like fancy boots. So you think about your standard like button top boots. They also made ones that were made out of satin and had like these embroidered panels on them. And so that technology, was available to make these like embroidered ribbons, or pieces. So those are interesting things to look for. So let's look at, another Baltimore album quilt. So this is the Captain George Russell Baltimore album quilt. This is definitely one of those high style quilts. Here you have my dear friend the eagle. You guys know I love eagles. And then of course the cornucopias in all four corners. And this one's interesting because this bottom vine is, the green is a different color than this. And so my guess is it was a different dye lot, or a different fabric that aged differently. And you see it kind of happening here in the flowers too. You see that these two seem to use this bluish green, whereas these two seem to use this yellowish green. And I would say, as you guys know, green fabric, until they had the safe chemical green. Scheele's green was the one that killed everybody because of the arsenic. But until they came up with like a safe green was made by over dyeing blue with yellow or vice versa. And so when you lose one of those dye colors, or it fades out, or it's fugitive, meaning it washes away, you end up with these like really differing colors. And it's a shame because this quilt, when it was new, was probably stunning. This keeps returning us to the top of the page. Let's see. Okay, this one is Baltimore Bride's Presentation. Okay, Mary Simon, née Heidenroeder. She is a woman. She came to Baltimore. They think they've documented her arrival in Baltimore. She was German, and they can, I think it's, she's definitely been credited with specific quilts, and I think there was a diary from somebody in this like neighborhood that what she had written kind of closed the gap on some of this, attribution of Mary Simon, and that she might have been like sort of the patient zero of Baltimore album quilt trend. This is obviously not only high style, but I think this is like the pinnacle high style. You see, these are like, they're blocks, but they're but they blend together. Like you just looking at the quilt from a distance, it really looks like a big, whole cloth quilt that then has all of this really dense applique on it. But they are discrete blocks. You just can't necessarily see it very well. But again, like I have made a few Baltimore album-ish things. There is a quilt, and I think it's part of this collection, at the BMA. If it's not at the BMA, it's at the Center for History and Culture. But it has a squirrel that is surrounded by a wreath of strawberries. And I thought, oh, this one will be so fun. I'm going to pattern it. So I did, just for fun. And the squirrel itself wasn't too bad. But that ring of strawberries took me forever to applique them. I made them out of hot pink velveteen. And then I started embroidering like the stems and the whatever you call the thing on the top of a strawberry, the little star-shaped thing on the top of the strawberry, the leaves, and then seeds. Oh my gosh. I got about a quarter of the way through and was like, I need a break. And I've yet to finish that block. So all of the work that goes into one of these, and I love to applique. I could applique 24/7 if my wrists will manage. So these kind of things, I don't know, this woman Mary Simon must have been like just I don't know. Her fingers must have been flying, and she must have had people helping. You know, I think that has definitely been determined that she had sort of this cottage industry of women. But yeah, I mean, look at these. These baskets are so like detailed with so much stuff in them. Just amazing. All right, back up to the top. Yeah. I'm really bummed that they don't have images for a bunch of these, but you know, like I said, I get it. I understand. Um, I'm looking to see if I see the quilt that I know I've seen it. I have come across it in here, and now I'm not seeing it. Unless it's this one. No, it's not that one. Let me see if it's this one. No. Maybe I came across it at the Maryland Center for History and Culture. I'm not sure. Because I know I saw a picture of it while I was researching stuff. Um, what a bummer that I'm not seeing it. Because it's a really pretty, delightful quilt. Um, there's a horse in it. There's uh, the squirrel. Um, some of the other, ubiquitous stuff. So this one's a child's album quilt. If we look at that one, so I mean, you could see like the difference between what we would consider, a Baltimore album quilt, a high style Baltimore album quilt, and then something more simple like this. That's probably, and maybe even made by a child. If you look at some of this, it's a little wonky, but possibly inspired by like maybe this child's parent. Her mother made a Baltimore album quilt, and so she made one too. And it was, scaled down to be a child-sized project. We often have to guess and make educated guesses, I suppose. All right. Let's see. What else? Did we look at this one? Rebecca Penn Magruder. So this one's got multiple eagles on it. You've got this one in the center that looks like it's that ombre fabric. It's the fabric that I always think to myself, it looks so modern, but it's actually quite old. Like early, like 1830s, 1840s, I think. So you'll see this fabric in a lot of Baltimore album quilts. And then you've got this eagle up here. Very interesting. And then this, I can't tell what that is. This one here looks like there's the hand, the heart, there's the crossed crook things, crescent moon, and stars. I think that's Oddfellows, possibly references. The chain, the 3 links. I think that's all Oddfellows. So it looks like they have some other images here. Yeah, you can see this ombre fabric in this. And I'm pretty sure this is one I've seen at the museum. I think this one might have been in the Wild and Untamed show that they did of the Baltimore album quilts, and Dr. Dunton was documented in there. And you could see the eagle here too. Yeah, there's that Oddfellows block. Oh, there's like the little hatchet. Like, yeah, very interesting imagery. Kind of more of the same. This one looks interesting. This one up here has got these crosses and sort of a crescent shape. I don't know if that's like a swag. Not sure what that is. I don't know what that is either, but that looks like a horn. A lyre. There's a lyre there. Maybe that's like a banner of some sort there across the middle of the instruments. Very pretty stuff. I mean, again, like, you look at these, and I mean, this is the time it takes to applique all of this stuff down. The time it takes to cut it out, to draw it, to cut it out, to applique it. I mean, it's just, it's amazing to me. The effort. Oh my, okay, that stayed. This is fun. The strip quilt. Cotton silk or rayon. It's pretty big. Origin Mississippi. Eloise Lindsay. Let's see if we can find out about her. Well, yeah, not much about her. We just have her dates. So she looks like she lived to be 90 years old. Lovely quilt. And yeah, looks like that's it. But I'm hoping very soon we get images of these other ones. My Broken Foot Blues handkerchief quilt. I mean, that sounds fascinating, right? Look at this. This is, so Pamela Studstill. Looks like she's a living artist. And this is a watercolor of a quilt. And that's really interesting. So, let's see. I'm assuming. Oh, look at this. View all works. Okay. So is this the watercolor sketch for this quilt? No, this says number 76. This is number 75. But I'm wondering if 75 then led to 76. Or I don't know. I mean, they look to be the same. Or, you know, this looks like the same thing. Hand dyed and hand painted cotton. See if it'll. Yeah. Okay, it seems like the piecing, well, I don't know. This is kind of complicated piecing. Unless some of these fabrics are sort of printed in such a way. But yeah, lots of little pieces. But I don't know how much of this are these pieced, like pieced blocks, you know, little squares. I'm guessing the stripy stuff is striped fabric and not pieced, but who knows? That could actually be pieced as well. All right. Why don't we look at... that's interesting. It rearranged this. Okay, that's interesting. All right. Here's another thing I thought was really interesting that you can do here. And I don't know if other museums are doing this. It would be really cool if they are, because then you end up with a contact sheet. But you can do this search and then view PDF, and it makes this document for you. Basic report. So obviously these are not a lot of help because we don't have pictures of them, but if you scroll down here where we had pictures, you've got these thumbnails. Isn't that amazing? So like if you're doing research, like you could save this document and, you know, have all those thumbnails to refer back to. This I think is a very helpful thing in terms of, you know, researching what museums have. So my hope is that other museums have this capability as well. It's the software that they use for their collections management, I'm pretty sure. So, you know, I've been to a couple of other places that will give you like a handout, you know, on a quilt tour. I think the Newark Museum may have done this. So it's entirely possible that it's the specific, you know, collection management software that does this kind of stuff. But in any event, I think it's really cool. I thought it was very cool. All right, so let us look at the Maryland Center for History and Culture. Like I said, this is the Maryland Historical Society, essentially, and it has been around for a long time. Dr. Dutton was a member, and I've been a member of the museum. I think I let my membership lapse, but I need to re-up that. But, you know, as a member, so it's a private museum. So the Baltimore Museum of Art is state funded. You know, well, we say federally funded. We don't know now, but state funded for sure. And it's always free. You can go there anytime. Obviously, to get into specific things in the collections, you have to, you know, apply for that and get permission and stuff. But Maryland Center for History and Culture is a private museum, so it does, you know, you have to pay to get in there. But you know, if you're a member, you have a little bit of a leg up in terms of getting appointments there. And they have a really robust library. So I've been able to visit the library and research some things, but I haven't I haven't had a chance to find out what, like, if you wanted to examine a quilt, like what process that involves. At the BMA, there's a specific process you have to go through. You have to identify the quilt, and then you have to kind of get on the textile curator's like radar. And they have these regular like curator days where you can kind of get on their schedule, and they will have an object, and it's part of this like just kind of like open house day that you can get an appointment for. I don't know if it works the same way at the Maryland Center for History and Culture. I would imagine it's kind of a similar process at many museums, but I'm not entirely sure. In any event, I have seen many of their Baltimore album quilts because these were definitely part of the Wild and Untamed display. That was at, now I'm trying to remember. It was at the at the Center for History and Culture. But they had their own quilts displayed, but they also borrowed from the Baltimore Museum of Art. So it was kind of interesting that the two worked together on this. So this one I have absolutely seen. I have pictures of it. I'm generally not a fan of red and green quilts, but this one is it's interesting. And this is made by the Gorsuch family. Gorsuch is a name that's recognizable in Baltimore. And so yeah, I mean it's a really lovely example of an album quilt. They're calling it a Baltimore album quilt. It doesn't really share all of the same characteristics as the other Baltimore album quilts we've looked at. So I don't know. And I'd have to talk to a Baltimore album scholar, but I kind of am like, stuff like this just to me is an album quilt. It's not necessarily, specific to that Baltimore album look, but I don't know. I mean, there may be a categorization for this style that I'm just not aware of. Here's my quilt. So this one, this was by Rachel Meyer Walter, a Bavarian immigrant who came to America in 1839. I believe she's another one of the names that's kind of associated with this maybe cottage industry. So this is the block that I patterned. Let's see if yeah. So you can see this fun little squirrel. He was easy to applique. These dang strawberries. And actually, my version, I reduced the number of strawberries because I was like, too many strawberries. Too many. I want to say it's like, I don't know, 40 or 50 strawberries, and I reduced it down to like 30, I think. So, but this quilt, it's not in super condition. You see there's a lot of fabric loss, but what a fun quilt. There's an eagle here. With fugitive dye, so there's no dye left. It's just white on white. My guess is the eagle was probably red, and so if that's the case, it was these might be turkey red, but that eagle was not. And I don't think these are turkey red. They're not the right kind of red, I think, for it to be turkey red. Yeah, so lots of interesting stuff on this. You've got these military men on horseback. You've got this little cannon back here, and lots of flowers. I didn't even realize this. I think these are deer, maybe. I think that's a deer. Looks like it's got antlers. Also, fugitive fabric, fugitive fabric dye. I think that's what's happening in a lot of places in here. And you have fabric loss. But I think this would have been a fugitive. Because it's white on white. They wouldn't have been doing that. But look at these. Here's these lyres. That's very common in Baltimore album quilts. Of course, birds are. I think this is a pineapple, and these are pears. And look at these butterflies. Yeah, this is just a lovely quilt. And I think this is some bizarre fish. It's really weird looking, but then it's got these like thistle like things, and these sort of tulips. And knowing that this woman was an immigrant, from Bavaria, but that's Germany. You can definitely see kind of this German decorative influence. if you look at the quilts you'd see in, the Pennsylvania Dutch quilts, you see a lot of this tulip shape, different versions of it. And of course, pairs of birds are popular. Like that true Pennsylvania German, Pennsylvania Dutch, like the hex signs and stuff, you'll see the two birds. They're called the distelfinks. So you see some of this imagery in here that's similar. Here's these two deer. I like these. They look like reindeer. Their antlers look like reindeer. So yeah, that's a really lovely one. All right, come on now. Um, this one, very similar to another one that's at the BMA. This one is something Dr. Dutton did some research on, particularly on this block, the Little Lucy block. And what he discovered was that Little Lucy, I think, was like a nursery rhyme or children's rhyme sort of thing. And it says Little Lucy here. And so he had done this kind of research about, what Little Lucy was. So let's see. The quilt is sometimes called Little Lucy after the female figure in the bottom left corner, who is believed to what? Believed to represent a children's book character. Okay. It was possibly made for Captain Aust. Many of the squares are inscribed with names of friends and family members. So this is a great one that has signatures on it. Makes it easier to research. But yeah, it was funny to me. I mean, you think about the kind of oddball things that we research today, because we're like, this is something that's not in, our pop culture today. Like, so we have to look back and, was this a thing in the mid-century, whatever. So I think it's kind of funny that this Little Lucy character was something that certainly not in my experience. Like, I've never heard of it, but that it was something maybe from Dr. Dunton's childhood that he researched. I thought that was kind of interesting. All right, let's look at a couple more. Look at this. What is this? Oh my goodness, look at this. Narrow printed fabric. Okay, one of the earliest known examples of a crazy quilt, 1839. And that's interesting because it's a cotton crazy quilt. Cotton crazy quilts were, they were like the poor girl's crazy quilt. I saw it referred to that recently, or the plain girl's crazy, or something to that effect of like, the farm girl. She doesn't have access to, silks and velvets because she's a farm girl. She doesn't need that stuff. She has cotton, which I think is pretty demeaning. But, I mean, if you are living in a rural area, it doesn't necessarily mean you don't have access to things like that or you don't want things like that. But, on a farm, certainly these cotton fabrics would have been more useful. And so it makes sense that to have all of these little snippets. But this is a pretty big quilt, I think. Let's see. Look for so 36 blocks, randomly placed multicolored calico patches. But let's see. Oh gosh, did they really not give the size? I can't tell. Oh, here we go. 110 by 115 inches. So that's a really big quilt. We're talking queen sized. Am I right about that? At least. So yeah. So what like queen sized is like 104. It's probably king size. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's big. And look how dense like these two blocks here are. Looks like the pieces are tinier in those two blocks. I mean, this truly looks like it was just pull stuff out of the scrap bag and stitch, which is so interesting for 1839. If this date, if they've truly got this date nailed down. That's pretty interesting because so 1839, the in terms of crazy quilts, the silk and velvets, those were 1880s. I think the peak can be said to be like 1884, 1883, 1884 is when you see this like massive making of those quilts. See this one, 1884. This one's 1880. So yeah, 1880. Definitely, that's the time period. This one I've seen before. I think this one is a really nice. So this one is, let's see, Maryland Chintz Applique Album Quilt, designed by Mrs. Frances Montague Monteil. Oh my God. Joanna Penelope Elizabeth Cushing Montel. Or Montiel or Montel? I'm sorry, it's Montel. What a name. So Robin says a typical king size is 108 inches square. Okay. Yeah, I knew it was bigger than 104. In my mind, I'm thinking 52-inch fabric times 2 is 104. Like, so individual squares made and signed by various women of Frederick, Maryland. Frederick is west of Baltimore City. So this one, they do not have a size on this one, do they? Oh, that's irritating. Yeah, I'm not seeing it anywhere. So, but I have seen this one. And I think it's a really nice, it's a well-designed use of chintz fabric in the broderie purse style. So, of course, what they're doing is they're taking a big piece of chintz, or not a very big piece of chintz fabric, and cutting out the stuff in it and appliquing it down in order to extend it. So, but looking at all of these different pieces, I would argue that this person, Mrs. Frances Montague Montel, she had some access to good fabric, because it's looking to me like this wasn't some small piece of chintz that she, stretched out. This looked like she had access to lots of chintz, and so she was able to cut this out. And I think it's well designed. It's pretty well balanced. And then this fabric here is like a border print. That's yardage. These aren't quilts that were made out of scraps. This was purchased yardage. You can see this quilting in here. I mean, look at that dense feathered vine. And then you've got this really dense feathering around all of the broderie purse pieces. Yeah, that's some pretty intense quilt making. So yeah, what is that? Is that a flower? Yeah, I guess that is. So, my friend Mary Kay, of course, has done some research into these chintz panels, and that doesn't apply to this, but she has also discovered, kind of this, these chintz panels when they were created, when they appeared in the United States. In some cases, they were sort of the shoddier stuff that was coming out of England, and they were basically bringing this stuff to the U.S. and kind of just dumping it on the population here, because chintz has had a storied past. And if you guys are around when I read the chintz book, there's all kinds of drama with chintz. So, so in the 1800s, we experienced this kind of having chintz dumped on us. I don't think that's the case with this one, but there are the chintz patterns that are very familiar, and you'll see them over and over in quilts. There's a like a fruit basket that you'll often see kind of in a border situation. There's these baskets with birds, these nests of birds and baskets and stuff, and you'll see them over and over. And it's kind of like the Cranston VIP fabric. You're like, oh yeah, I remember that one. It's kind of like that. All right, let's look at one more. Let's see, what can we find here? Here's a fun one. Look at this one. So this was made by Mimi Dietrich. She's a friend. So the Baltimore Hun is, if you don't know much about Baltimore, it's kind of, Baltimore has sort of these various and different symbols. Obviously crabs are a big deal. The blue crab, the Chesapeake Bay is such a big deal here. The oriole is our bird. The black-eyed Susan is our flower. The checker spot is our butterfly. We've got all of this sort of ubiquitous stuff. The beehive-haired Hun is indicative of this area of Baltimore, kind of this blue collar, sort of the steel workers, that kind of thing. And so the Baltimore Hun was this like, I don't know if you've seen the movie Hairspray, and the women that are in there with, they're very concerned about their hair, but they're still kind of working class. That's kind of what the Baltimore Hun is supposed to be, this like working class woman. And it's always been kind of tongue in cheek. And there's the Hun Fest, was this festival in this one specific area of northern Baltimore City called Hampstead. And it was all, lots of fun, very tongue in cheek. You'd get all the women with their crazy beehives and the cat eye glasses, and, very like 1960s look. So that's what this is about. And, Mimi Dietrich being from Maryland, she actually went to my master's alma mater, University of Maryland, Baltimore County. I think she might have been like the first graduating class out of there, I think. She told me. She and her husband met there, and they ended up working on this UMBC project. So lots of cool things. And so what she's got represented here are all of these, again, ubiquitous things. So like this is a crab cake. You can see it's a crab in the claws, but it's a cake. The pink flamingo is another kind of Baltimore thing that sort of goes along with the Baltimore Hun. John Waters films, definitely, like I mentioned Hairspray, but John Waters is, a very, I don't know, important character in Baltimore. He's weird, and Baltimore's weird. So you've got that, the pink flamingo. The row homes, Baltimore row homes are a big deal. There's all of this history about, the women would go out, Baltimore Pride, women would go out, Saturday mornings and scrub off their porches, because these row homes were built with these beautiful marble steps and stuff. So they go out, and there's, I can't remember what the story is. It's some kind of cleaner that they would scour their steps with, so they were nice and clean. And then they could sit out on the porch, the porch steps. They're not covered porches. It's just a few steps up to the front door. So yeah, it's just so very ubiquitous. She also mentions the ruby slippers, because there's no place like home. I mean, just very sweet. This is such a fun quilt. Mimi also teaches a very simplified version of Baltimore album quilting. She's taken like the symbols of Baltimore album quilts and made them more simple for people that are beginning quilters who might want to dabble in this. And it's funny because I've talked to her about, she talks about the old lady who taught her how to applique in the 70s. And it's just really funny. And what was really exciting, Mimi and I talked, like, I think it's been more than a year ago. I did a program for the Baltimore Applique Society, which Mimi is one of the founding members. And she and I were talking, and she showed me some pictures, and she said, okay, the old lady who taught me how to applique or quilt had these prickings. So, back in the day, if you weren't able to take a picture, how do you document, what you're looking at with a quilt? And how would you document it like real sized? Well, you could do a pricking, which is to lay a block, lay a section of a quilt over paper and use a needle and prick through, the quilting lines, or prick through to trace the applique or the piecing. So that in that way you're documenting, accurate to size the quilt. So she had these prickings that this woman had given her, and she said, Stephanie, I think that these were Dr. Dunton's. And I went back and I looked, and indeed the exact same prickings appear in his collection, and the handwriting on the copies she has is his handwriting. So I think he made copies of these and possibly shared them with people. Now, I know she gave me the name of the woman that had taught her. It's in my records. And I'd looked to see if there was any kind of correspondence between him and this woman, and I didn't find anything yet, but that's not to say it's not in there. So that was very interesting. It's so fun when you find all of these little connections. And Baltimore's like kind of that kind of town. It's a very hometown kind of feel. I think we get a bad rap for a lot of different reasons. But anyway, so much fun. These are just so fun. Yeah, she says there's no place like home, hun. So cute. right. Well, I hope you have enjoyed that stroll through Baltimore quilts or what the Baltimore museums own, because obviously they're not all quilts made here. But a good number. And, I, not to say like that we deserve to have the Baltimore album quilts, but I think it's nice to know that at least these two institutions have some of these like important quilts, and that they are being cared for. Not that I would want to take away the joy and glory of ownership any Baltimore family, but I think it's really nice that they're in the museums where they can be cared for and also studied. And I know a number of people that are doing Baltimore album quilt studies, and two people that I've had the pleasure of speaking to frequently over the past year are what I would say Baltimore album quilt scholars. They know what they're talking about. So I learn a little tidbit from them every time I talk to them. And like I said, it's Baltimore album quilts are never going to be my topic, just because I feel like a lot of people have already done a lot of work on that, and it's I don't know what I could add to the research there, but they are so interesting to look at, and they're some of them are so pretty. I don't know if you missed quilt me and Jill of Quilt Nerding on Tuesday. One of the things she showed was a Baltimore album quilt that her dealer friend Jane Lurie, who she lives in New York, she had I think recently acquired this album quilt, and it was stuffed applique, like almost, well, I mean literally every block had stuffed elements in it, and it was different looking than other Baltimore album quilts, so I think it like fits in a different one of those different categories. But it had like a lemon tree and an orange tree, and then all of these, beautiful stylized flowers, and even the border, it had a vine of flowers, and all of them were stuffed. So it was an incredibly heavy quilt, but just so lovely. And, I got to touch it. You don't usually get to touch the pretty, the pretty rare quilts. But anyway, it always makes me feel good when I know that those quilts are being cared for. They're not in danger of being made into a coat. Oh my God. I think I would literally pass out, die on the spot if I ever went somewhere and saw somebody wearing a quilt coat made out of like a legit old Baltimore album quilt. I think I would die. I think I know a lot of people who would just drop dead on the spot. If you yourself want to make a Baltimore album quilt and then turn it into a coat, I say more power to you. That would be awesome. But some of these old rare ones. All right. Are you guys ready for some Carrie Hall? We left off, we're still on chapter 9 with accessories. So let's see. Yeah, we left off, we'd read about perfumes, right? In which I think it's interesting to call a perfume an accessory, but I guess it is. So where we left off was with sunshades and parasols. And I think, we might be able to finish today. There's a lot of pictures here. So as a reminder, we are reading From Hoopskirts to Nudity by Carrie A. Hall. This book was published in 1938, although, as I have mentioned, I think she's writing it in 1936 because she's split the decades up in by sixes. So the last major decade she talks about is 1926 to 1936. So I think it's odd that she chose to do that. I mean, I think even writing from the perspective of like 1936, 1937, 1938, whatever, it would have made sense to me to break things up in fives, I realized that events don't necessarily happen, like decades don't really happen in any specific way. I mean, we could break decades up any way we want to, but, we tend to do them in tens or fives and not in sixes. I thought that was weird. Anyway, So the chapter we're reading is chapter 9, accessories, and we've covered a lot of stuff. We've covered shoes, gloves, stockings, jewelry, hats, hairstyles. Gosh, a lot of stuff in here. Let's see, what else? Yeah, I think that's the gloves. Did I say gloves? Yeah. So lots of stuff. Lots of things we do not use anymore. like hats and gloves. So we move along. Chapter 9, accessories. Part 3. The sunshade, the parasol, the umbrella. The sunshade, that frivolous toy under which woman hides from the face of the sun god to defy his burning rays, is as old as time. All right, Carrie, you're going to sit here and talk about how a sunshade is frivolous, but I will be honest. As a person who burns just thinking about the sun, I am grateful to have some sort of sunshade, parasol, or umbrella, I got to tell you. I used to just suffer. And then it occurred to me, like, you don't necessarily need an umbrella just for rain. If you're standing on your niece's soccer field while she's playing a game and it's 100 degrees and the sun is at like high noon, an umbrella is your best friend. All right, so she's calling it a frivolous toy. In China, they carried its utilitarian offspring, the parasol, for more than 2,000 years before the Christian era. Legend attributes the invention of it to the wife of Lu Pan, a celebrated carpenter of antiquity. "Sir," said this incomparable spouse to her husband, "you make with extreme cleverness houses for men, but it is impossible to make them move, whilst the object which I am framing for their private use can be carried to any distance beyond even 1,000 leagues." And Liu Pan, stupefied by his wife's genius, saw the unfolding of the parasol. In Greece, the sunshade was considered a sign of divine majesty, and Bacchus alone of all the gods had the privilege of using it. Well, of course, if you're going to sit outside and like guzzle wine, you'll want a sunshade. You can't always frolic in the woods. Sometimes you have to come out into the light. It also played a most important part not only in the sacred and funeral ceremonies, but in the great holidays of nature and in the private lives of the noble ladies of Athens. Aristophanes alludes to it as a symbolic instrument destined to recall to human beings the acts of Ceres and Proserpine. And in his comedy, The Knights, he says, his ears opened and shut something like a sunshade. In a man, according to the Anacreon, the carrying of a parasol was the mark of a libertine and effeminate life. God forbid, you don't want to let the sun or rain touch you. You're considered effeminate. But also we see it universally adopted as a sign of the highest distinction by Oriental people, to be displayed over the head of the king in time of peace and occasionally in time of war. You know, when writers of this time period say Oriental, like you're like, do they mean the Far East? Do they mean Asia? Are they including the Middle East? Like, I hate it when they use terms like that. I mean, you know, through today's lens, we like, that's Orientals are rugs, not people. But shrug. And it is thus that it may be contemplated on the sculptures of ancient Egypt, where its usage was exclusively confined to the pharaohs and the great dignitaries, but to these only. Now that's interesting. Like, I don't know. I mean, the Egyptians were an interesting group of people. And I could see, obviously, we have lots of sumptuary laws throughout time and history, but my gosh, to deny somebody a covering from the sun or the rain, because they are not a pharaoh, seems kind of mean. In Persia and India, the parasol in every age has been unfolded in all its splendor as an immutable symbol of royal majesty. The Greeks and Romans not only used the parasol in their open theaters, but also in battles, and above all, in the promenade. The ancient Romans brought to the decoration of their parasols a magnificence unknown today. For we read of parasols made of silk, covered with diamonds, mounted on Indian bamboo, or on a stem of gold carved and encrusted with the most wondrous jewels. I mean, and I'm just happy to have my little push the button and it opens up and it fits in my backpack. I mean, right? In China and Japan, the parasol plays an important part in the festive life, both as a sign of rank and in conjunction with the fan as a weapon of seductive charm. It is an article of astonishing grace when used in their acrobatic games. Yeah, I mean, I have seen some, like, I guess, some sort, like the Cirque du Soleil type of, acrobatic stuff. I've seen them use parasols, and they're very lovely. They're just, I mean, kind of like fans and like fan dances and things. I think parasols can be used, in those routines. Just when the parasol developed into that utilitarian article known as the umbrella is not definitely known. We read of their being made of leather in 1676, which must signify that they were used as a protection against the rain when made of a material of sufficient texture to shed water. A passage in The Tatler, published in London in 1760, alludes to the umbrella as follows. The tucked-up seamstress, I don't know if that's temptress or seamstress, seamstress, walks with hasty strides while streams run down her oiled umbrella sides. In England, the sunshade was considered strictly a woman's article of apparel. The first man to appear on the streets of London carrying an umbrella was Jonas Hanway, and he was scoffed at, reviled, and caricatured. In fact, he was mobbed off the streets. My gosh, because he didn't want the rain on his clothes. I mean, come on, people. But he persisted in spite of being derided and eventually won recognition for the umbrella as a man's perquisite as well as a woman's. Following this period, the umbrella or parasol was regarded as a necessary article of apparel and was subject to the whims of fashion. Like all other articles of dress, it developed idiosyncrasies. In 1862, there was an invention called a combination parasol umbrella. And there have been combination umbrella walking sticks with a field glass attachment. I think I've seen these, like literally like the handle is actually like a little like, like a one side of binoculars, and that it is a walking stick, but also, it's big and long. But I don't know what is a combination parasol umbrella. To me, that sounds like just a pretty umbrella. There was an umbrella called the universal walking stick, in the hollow handle of which could be carried writing materials or the wherewithal for a cocktail. Isn't that funny? You're pulling a bottle of gin and a little martini glass. The parasol or umbrella was not known in America until about 1740, when a belle of Windsor, Connecticut, carried an umbrella which had been brought to her from the West Indies. Her neighbors mocked her by carrying sieves balanced on broom handles. Leave this woman alone. Come on. The parasol of today has undergone many transformations in size, shape, the material of which it was made, and the various uses to which it is put. But the ever-increasing use of the automobile, remember this is 1930-something, with the ever-increasing use of the automobile, the parasol umbrella will soon be relegated to the discard along with other fashions which civilization has outgrown. I think not. It was pouring rain here yesterday. My son had to catch a bus, and could we find a single umbrella in this house? No, because I think they were all in the back seat of my husband's car. There were probably 6 umbrellas in my husband's car. So yeah, umbrellas are still important. That's so funny that she's predicting they're going to go away. Now we're going to get into quite a racy subject. Underwear. So first, let's look at these. So we've got drawers from 1895, and we've got underwear stripes or strips. She's saying that's Stryps. And then it says bras and scanties. Scanties. I'm assuming that's some sort of terminology for panties. And then we have your ubiquitous drawers. And these would have had these are attached here, like at the top, in the front and back. They're attached to the waistband. But typically the rest of this, that, I don't know what you call it, like the crotch part, that would actually be unstitched and open, because women at the time, you didn't necessarily pull your underdrawers down. In fact, before a certain period, I would say in the 1800s, women didn't wear underwear. You had your big skirts and your petticoats, and you didn't necessarily need them. I can't imagine not wearing underwear. it's just one of those things. I feel like underwear is necessary. But if you think about Spanx, like the Spanx shorts that are, for keeping your butt and your stomach all pulled in, those sometimes have that open crotch situation. I have never gotten them to work properly. I've peed all over myself. So I think that this engineering needs to be rethought. So Robin says, seems like a general parasol was used for show and shade, an umbrella for keeping dry in wet weather. A parasol umbrella is a very pretty umbrella. Yeah, that's kind of the gist I get. I don't know what else it would be, and you think about parasols like, they could be made of paper. They don't have to necessarily be impervious to water. So, because like you're saying, it's about shade. In fact, I think a lot of those, like, and I'm not sure if they're Chinese or Japanese, but, these Asian umbrellas they were paper parasols. So, yeah. And even, like, I guess silk is not necessarily going to shed water. So, something made of silk would be the same. But yeah, a parasol umbrella has got to be, like, it's got to shed water, but also be pretty. So, all right. Underwear. Having progressed from the Stone Age into the smooth and relegated pattern of living known as civilization, we expect to find some sort of underwear. But in this fearlessly frank age, when dress reform seems well on the way to nudity, she is positive showing your ankle just leads to nudity. Well, and she's not wrong. I mean, given hot pants and bikinis, she's not wrong. So all the cumbersome and injurious garments of the past have been consigned to the dumping ground of undesirable things. The established and unvarying types of burdensome underwear known in the last half of the 19th century are now but a memory. Underclothing, or unmentionables, have swung with the pendulum from one extreme, the wearing of chemise, drawers, a corset cover, and at least 6 petticoats of varying lengths, widths, and conditions of thickness, to the other extreme, which is a bra and a pair of scanties. Again, I'm guessing scanties is an old term for panties. I've never heard that. Scanties. So much have we abandoned that which Miss Flora McFlimsy of today may well bewail the scantiness of her wardrobe. Miss Flora McFlimsy. Okay, here's some more. We've got a Georgette combination underwear from 1925 and a combination corset cover and drawers. So there's the corset cover and drawers, and then here's the combination. So essentially what these are, exactly what they sound like. It's like a teddy, what we would call, lingerie, a teddy. It's a camisole type thing that's attached to, like, kind of shorts, like, bloomers or some sort of little shorts kind of thing. Combinations were pretty popular, I think, very late 1800s into the early 20th century. the corset cover was specifically for covering up this kind of like firm jutting out piece of your corset, because if you wear like a blouse or something that is even like fairly form fitting, you'll see that like kind of jut of the corset. So they would have these pretty like kind of camisole top things that had like insertion lace and things in them, so that if any of it showed through your top or your blouse, it would just be lacy stuff and not like this hard curve of the corset. The changing times and activities of the early 1880s had much to do with the changed attitude of the women in matters pertaining to dress, especially underwear. What was happening in the 1880s? Sports. The early days of the sports bra. The National Dress Association of Boston made a second attempt to effect a reform in women's clothes, this time from the standpoint of the garments worn underneath, having been convinced by a former attempt that this was the only way to remedy the situation. What situation? They hoped that if a complete revolution of the structure and adjustment of the underwear could be effected, the other problem would eventually take care of itself. The other problem? You mean women wanting equality and the right to vote? If we can change their underwear up, they might not be such a problem. Or maybe it's the other way around. Let's change our underwear up so that we have the freedom to be a problem. Dr. Jaeger of Stuttgart, Germany, had developed a wholly novel hygienic suit of underwear, which was much advertised both in Europe and in America. The combination garment was made of soft, elastic wool and was introduced at the Health Home in Danville, New York. This is a union suit that she's talking about, that this man created. So yeah, think about a union suit, your standard like all-in-one kind of thing. This type of union suit was later brought out as Munsing wear in the early part of the 20th century. This new type of garment was a decided improvement so far as health was concerned. But in addition to this union suit next to the skin, women still wore drawers, corset covers, and innumerable petticoats, so the matter of weight was still a problem. Well, the thing is, yeah, the heavy clothing, but I've mentioned this many, many times before, and I can speak from experience, having worn these clothing, this type of clothing in historical reenactment, is that the heaviness of whatever garments you're in, particularly on your bottom half, are balanced and held by your corset. So as long as your corset is not right against your skin, which is what causes chafing and pain, as long as you have like something underneath, it's typically like a blouse, or like a blousey kind of nightgowny sort of thing, and then you have your corset on, and then you have skirts then that sit on the bottom half of your corset. The heaviness is not necessarily as much of an issue. Now, would I rather wear, like yoga pants and a sports bra? Yeah, I would. But I think that even, Carrie Hall here is sort of perpetuating this idea that women's clothes were so uncomfortable. And yeah, they were heavy. They were probably hot in some situations. Certainly, you would not want to be caught out in a rainstorm wearing all this heavy skirts and things, but they were not as terrible as people make them out to be. Again, I have worn this stuff. I've worn this stuff in the heat. It's not ideal. It's not as bad as they make it sound. Even as late as the turn of the century, every hope chest contained many sets of underwear, scalloped and literally covered with hand embroidery. To those who know only the forthright scantiness of contemporary underwear, there is something uncanny and even vulgar in the billowy, bundling effects of those bygone underthings. I mean, I think even today we kind of admire that clothing. I mean, I think it covers up more than, people necessarily look for in sexy lingerie today. But, yeah, I don't think that we look at these things as being vulgar. So, Oh, gosh, Robin. Oh, no. 82 at noon. Gah. It's good to see you. Thank you for being here. I'll see you on the flip side. You have a good weekend, too. So, the modern desire for both luxury and comfort has achieved a quality of beauty and wearability in the undies of today. And from being a purely homemade product, it now represents a great manufacturing industry. This is true, but also at this exact same time, or maybe a little bit before, we have poorer people. I mean, this is the Great Depression era. We have poorer people making underwear out of things like feed sacks and sugar bags and stuff. In, rural farming communities and things like that. I mean, I have that in my family. I've heard lots of women talk about, their grandmothers, mothers in some cases, having lingerie made out of like the humblest of materials. The old-fashioned corset covered, much beribboned, of white muslin that was fitted as carefully as the dress itself, lest it be responsible for a wrinkle in the outside waist, gave way to the brassiere, which, in the course of its development, made possible the fashion known as the boyish form. Well, that's if it's a minimizer. Having passed through several changes in design and contour, it is now the only undergarment worn above the waistline. Smartness is a quality much to be desired, even in underwear. When it changed from the linen and batiste of the 19th century to the crepe de chine and near silk of the early 1900s, it also grew more scanty and clinging so as not to interfere with the slim, flat waists. Knickerbockers of silk replaced the petticoat in 1916. And so here we have a number of different things. So up here in that picture, they're saying it's a straight front corset. And I think it's kind of here, it's kind of going down into like a girdle situation. So you have, like both my grandmothers had these. This goes well into the, the late 20th century. I remember both my grandmothers squeezing into those girdles for Sunday, to go to church, and then, connecting their stockings and that kind of thing. My mom didn't wear stuff like that. But yeah, and then, some of these things, granted, they're certainly not the kind of things people wear today unless they're dressing in historic, history bounding or dressing in historic clothing. But I don't think that these are necessarily completely, like, out of the realm of what people might wear today. See. Oh, we have more pictures. Oh, yeah. Okay, so this is a nightgown and a corset cover and drawers combination. So that nightgown, I could see people wearing that today. And then this corset cover and drawers combination actually looks like a cute summer romper. But it appears like it has like, I don't know, I think it's maybe smocking. Or some type of like insertion. It's probably likely very pretty. Now we have a tailored satin nightgown from 1935. To me, that could even be like a gown, like an evening gown, depending on what kind of fabric it's made of. And then here we have nightgowns, lace nightgown combinations, and then sleeping pajamas, a slip and a nightgown. So as opposed to lounging pajamas. So here we have a nightgown here. We have the nightgown and combination here, and then the different pajamas down here. The lady on the left is wearing the sleeping pajamas, not to be confused with the lounging pajamas. Tinted underwear. Oh my gosh. Tinted underwear appeared as early as 1907, but was slow in gaining approval. However, by 1925, every undergarment worn was pastel tinted, white being considered a quite passé. In 1931, it took another step towards ultra-transparency, if not nudity. All underwear and nightgowns being made of georgette crepe or chiffon. And that goes on through the 20th century. I mean, especially as synthetics come into the picture. I've got lots of silky synthetics. Sorry about that. Smacking my microphone. Those fabrics became cheaper, easier to create, when they're made out of synthetics. The present day lingerie is a mere matter of a wisp of chiffon or silk and a scrap of lace. Oh, what would Carrie Hall do if you showed her a thong? They were not wearing thongs in the 30s. She would probably, again, scream and die on the spot. Too much lace, you add a bit of silk, and the result is a charming jiffy. Okay. After the post-war corsetless period had passed, and remember, this is World War I, because World War II has not happened yet when she wrote this book. After the post-war corsetless period had passed, the corset went through many variations in length, height above the waistline, and quality of material of which it was constructed. Finally, it became a foundation garment. I don't know how it was not already a foundation garment. I mean, that was its purpose, was the foundation. When this foundation garment was the only one worn, it really embraced 2 or 3 garments in one, a sort of lingerie ensemble, corset, panties, and brassiere. And I mean, again, that's the thing, corset, granted, was covering more of your body, cinching in more of your body, but I see the corset and the brassiere as being kind of an interchangeable thing. I don't think, you don't wear a corset and a brassiere together. They're, corset becomes brassiere, in my opinion. An ingeniously cut, so a sort of lingerie ensemble, an ingeniously cut garment that achieved an unbroken line. It was every woman's idea of chic and a delight to the dressmaker. The nightgown has gone through almost as many incarnations as the daytime dress. From the cumbersome garment of 50 years ago, it passed the fluffy, ruffled, transparent stage, and in 1933 achieved a strictly tailored silhouette with not a wrinkle to mar its dignity. In 1935, it was almost impossible to tell a nightgown from an evening dress. That's what I just said. Both being made of satin, severely plain in cut and contour, but so very pretty. I mean, I really think those just beautiful gowns of the 30s, early 20th century. Who was the artist? Erte? It's Erte, and I can't remember if that's I don't know if you pronounce the E on the end or not. I think you do. I think it's Erte. Anyway, that's sort of sylph-like, the short bobbed hair, the, that long look. I think it's very beautiful. Let's see. In 1935, it was almost impossible to tell a nightgown from an evening dress. But in 1936 came a reversion to type, and every smart modern woman was wearing a long-sleeved, high-necked nightgown like grandmother wore. Smartly tailored flannel nightgowns are considered quite the thing. So, okay, this is what Carrie Hall wants you wearing. She wants you wearing a flannel nightgown that touches the floor. We cannot show our ankles, even when we're asleep. Of course, these new flannel gowns are not the unsightly oblong box affairs of other days, but are streamlined, trimly tailored, and youthful in manner. What a pity that grandmother's quaint charm and dignity did not accompany these gowns for their return engagement. I think Carrie Hall would have been really happy on the prairie, not showing off, any necks, ankles, elbows. I can't decide whether she's okay with corsets or not. All right. Next is sportswear. Now that this also kind of boggles my mind that she's putting this in with accessories, because again, I feel like sportswear is it's clothing, so sportswear. With so many different kinds of sport, each demanding its own particular costume, as well as all kinds of activities, commercial or otherwise, requiring a uniform, it is not an improbable possibility to see in the future a national uniform dress of many types so that each worker may be recognized by the dress he wears. Okay. There are today many organizations that require their employees to wear uniforms or special kinds of dress while on duty. And there are many schools that require their students to wear uniforms, as well as many who think that this might be the remedy for the evils of constantly changing fashions. I mean, this persists today. But so far, the result has been just the reverse. It has doubled the needs of those wearing such uniforms, for they require regular clothing for their leisure dress. The tailored suit is the nearest approach to standardized dress that has so far made any impression on the American public, and it is subject to the whims of fashion, as are all other types of dress. And I think we still see this today. Men's business suits, probably not changed a whole lot since this time period, right? Certainly there are times when it's more form-fitting. There's times when, the double breasting or 2 buttons, 3 buttons, all that stuff. But honestly, with maybe some, the collars being wider or narrower, I think you could almost take a well-tailored, classic-looking men's suit, plop it in any era from, 1920s to now. And it could probably blend in a bit, Early in the 20th century, a uniform dress for the teenage girl was introduced under the name of its originator, Peter Thompson. It was a kilted skirt and a waist that was an exact imitation of a sailor's blouse. And so what she's talking about, she talks about a waist, is a shirt waist, which is essentially a shirt. A shirt for women, a blouse. Another quite similar costume was called a midi blouse suit. These were intended to solve the question of what the schoolgirl should wear, and they had quite a vogue. I think you can even see, I definitely feel like I've seen some schoolgirls, in this era. Maybe not in the U.S. so much. I think that, private schools here in the U.S., particularly Catholic schools, will wear, like a plaid pleated skirt, a kilted skirt, with some type of just plain blouse and maybe like a tie, or some type of little neck thing. But I have definitely seen, maybe in Europe or in Asia, Japan, these kind of sailor blouses, these midi blouses. It's almost like the collar kind of comes back and then goes into that flap in the back, of varying depths. So it may look more sailor-like or not as sailor-like. So yeah, this is something that has not necessarily gone out of, I don't know if it's considered fashionable, but it's still being done. But they were eventually superseded by dressier clothes, for they savored too much of a restriction and choice to remain in favor with the modern girl. But not really. They are still around. The evolution of the costume of all the various types of sport has been, in nearly every instance, from their particular kind of garment, developed in a heavy woolen material of bulky, voluminous silhouette, to a garment called shorts, which was introduced in the last decade. Shorts. During the Victorian period, the bathing suit of any decent Englishwoman required 12 yards of material. 12 yards of material. I mean, that's a lot. Now, granted, the width of their yards was not 42 inches like we see today, or 52 inches, depending on what type of fabric, but 12 yards is a lot. But the bathing beauties of today have eliminated so much of their scanty attire that it is a question if they may not go native without the traditional fig leaf, for the bathing suit of today is nothing much before and little less than half of that behind. Good grief. Carrie Hall. Okay, and so here is another little unattributed poem. On bathing dress in all its phases, huge volumes science might compile. The nymphs are blameless, but the crazes of prudish days are simply vile. But let's rejoice, the trammeled limb no longer spoils the morning swim. Our modern nymphs, whom wavelets kiss, wear thy pure image, Artemis. Costumes for archery, tennis, basketball, and other sports have all followed along the same lines. as the bathing suit. All athletes wear shorts, but stop short of quite such wholesale display of the nude. Oh my gosh, the shorts are so scandalous. I mean, not only are you showing your ankles, but your knees. Gasp. So here we have a 19th century bathing suit and a 20th century bathing suit. So, I mean, goodness gracious, she's showing some midriff. What a slut. And her knees and like a lot of her thighs. Oh. So this is the kind of thing I remember my grandmother wearing. You know, I see pictures of her. I mean, not when I was, not during my lifetime, but I'd see pictures of her wearing similar stuff to this with like, you know, little tennis shoes or little sandals. I mean, I really truly do not remember her wearing anything like really shorter than that. My grandmother was not a bikini person. This, I'm sorry, this does not look like 12 yards of fabric, so I don't know what she's talking about. Okay. However, skiing and skating are two types of sport for which shorts are not particularly adapted. Well, of course not, because you're skiing and skating in the ice and snow. Come on, Carrie Hall. So they require their own special costume. The riding habit is another type of dress that has seen many changes, from the voluminous skirts of side saddle days with their tight-fitting basque-like waists with postilion backs, through the divided skirt period when women first rode astride, to the present form of riding breeches and boots with an accompanying coat cut on mannish lines. During the last decade, American women, or more strictly speaking, Eastern women, have discovered the West, the opening of that new type of summer resort known as the Dude Ranch, with its 3 R's, riding, roping, and roundups. I love this. Called for an entirely different type of wardrobe. Even though the women were accustomed to riding the tan bark trails through the parks and even following the cross-country hunt, this was a life where riding was the major part of the daytime routine. While there are riding habits, this sport called for an outfit of a special kind of clothes, as there was added to our vastly increased number of costumes still another. The garment known as slacks, worn by boys and girls alike, is a reincarnation of one worn in 1400 BC by the women of Crete, and as a special costume may be inoffensive if worn at home in the garden, on the beach, or for yachting, but as a street costume, it is most out of place. Okay, Carrie Hall, not only are you going to drop dead seeing that we wear thongs, of all things, and bikinis, but my God, a woman in the street wearing slacks? Oh my goodness, it's just the end of times, isn't it? Now, here's riding attire. You got the old-fashioned 19th century riding habit for side saddle riding, and then you've got the modern look. I mean, look at this lady. So jaunty with those jodhpurs and that long vest thing. Oh my goodness. Since the invention of the airplane, its pilots have worn uniforms, but with the development of transcontinental airline service, it demands an up-to-the-minute uniform for its pilots, specially designed and cut to give the most comfort and freedom, yet present a smart appearance. Okay. And it requires a natty uniform for its hostesses, air hostesses. A notable woman flyer, annoyed because the only clothes available for her sport were totally unsuited for the purpose for which they were designed, coined a new slogan. Now, how many women are flying planes at this point? I mean, Amelia Earhart for sure, but like, I mean, if we're talking about flight attendants too, like, and again, how many commercial passenger flights were happening during these days too? You know, I guess the air stewardess is a very new profession at this point. A notable woman flyer, annoyed because the only clothes available for her sport, and again, this is funny, like piloting a plane is a sport. That's interesting. So anyway, coined a new slogan: clothes for the woman who lives actively, and began to design them accordingly. The principle on which they were built was freedom of movement. Room enough where there ought to be room, and snugly fitting where they should be trig. Okay. For fastenings, she used gadgets which had to do with airplane parts that were amusing as well as useful. I don't know what that means. Later, costumes of this type were adopted by train stewardesses. Okay. So any type of attendant. The woman who makes history today, and some of them certainly do, is the woman who knows when to wear what. And thinking back to flight attendants, because I flew so much in the last few weeks, I paid attention to what the flight attendants were wearing. It's funny, like I fly Southwest a lot, and you can see I'm guessing they can probably wear some parts of their uniform can be their own, like, as long as it's like, I don't know, black slacks or something like that, or gray slacks or something. But they have a lot of garments that are obviously part of, like you could probably purchase them through Southwest or maybe choose things that, I don't know if you get like free uniform parts like every so often. But I've noticed that they have like jackets and shirts and things that are clearly Southwest branded, that, it's part of this, not everybody has to wear the same thing, but they're all like, they're consistent. They go together. And I noticed that also, I think I also flew Delta. So, at one time, everybody was dressed exactly the same, the flight attendants. And I think now they're kind of giving people, the ability, depending on your body type. I mean, not everybody, can necessarily wear the same things comfortably, depending on your height and so forth. The woman who makes history today, and some of them certainly do, is the woman who knows when to wear what. At one time, weeks or even months were spent preparing for a trip. Traveling was a big event. Trailers, the modern covered wagons of today, were unheard of. But in this day of rapid transportation and hard surfaced roads, this is even before the international or the national highway system here in the United States. So trailers are as comfortable as efficiency apartments. I guess so. Yeah. I mean, this is the time I think of, people starting to have like that, doing road trips and that kind of thing. So yeah, I would assume that like the modern RV had, it had an ancestor, I guess, in this time period. As the American family takes to trailer life, there will be a demand for a special kind of wardrobe, something that will meet the needs of every occasion, something simple and wholesome in line between an outdoor and an indoor sports dress, and it might even be trousers. Now, how are trousers different than slacks? To me, they are the same thing. And a sleeping garment for that sleep in the open life seems to be needed. All right. So let's see, how much more do we have? Because it is 4 o'clock my time. You know what, guys, I think this is going to take us yet another week because there's still so much of this book, this chapter left. Yeah, we've got aprons, furs, some random, cosmetics we haven't touched on yet. Some random section on lace and silk. I think we're going to have to give this, yeah, I see some Carrie Hall snark coming up, so I think we're gonna have to save that for next time. All right, guys, it's 4 o'clock my time. I am going to get a few things done before it's dinner time. I hope you enjoyed looking at quilts of the Baltimore Museum and Museum of Art and the Center for History and Culture. And they're easy Googles if you want to go and look at those things. You just have to go to the search their collection link on their website. Pretty easy to find. And yeah, look at other museums, like wherever you live. See, I would say that any larger institution probably has a quilt or two. I'm often surprised at the institutions that do have some quilts. The Newark is a great one. The Boston Museum of Modern Art. Obviously the Met, the Speed Museum, the Folk Art Museum. I mean, there's so many of them, and so many of them have their collections online. So I would say if you're going to research a type of quilt, obviously the Quilt Index is a great resource. And of course, all the books that we always look at. But I would say the fast and easiest way to get started on researching something is go to the museums. And look at their, not physically, but online, and just look at their collections and search and see what you see. And, obviously Baltimore album quilts, we got a lot of them here in Baltimore. So you're going to see, what you saw today. So anyway, yeah, have a great weekend. I think that I'm in for more rain, but hopefully wherever you are, you're in for some good weather. And, yeah, and hopefully Robin doesn't cook because, 90 degrees. Ugh, that just is oppressive. So, all right, guys, have a wonderful weekend. I will see you on Monday. Yeah, I look forward to hopefully having some things this weekend that I can show you on Monday. So, thanks, Marianne. Take care. So I couldn't do this without you. I wouldn't want to do this without you. Thank you guys so much for being here and supporting my little research efforts. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed today. So I will talk to you soon. Take care. Have a great weekend. Mwah!